So this chapter starts off with us seeing a giganto-heteromorphic type citizen being attacked by other citizens with some kind of support gear that shoots like water or something. And it's entirely a misunderstanding because they think that this giant woman is a villain, but she's not. And Deku comes to save her and he's like, it's a rainy night, tensions are high, but this person is not your enemy. And they're like, if she was innocent, she should stop acting so suspicious then. And she explains that she was just late for the evacuation and she was going to the shelter eventually. And that she was really scared, and Izuku's like, I'm sure everyone else is scared as well. And then she says, do you think things will go back to normal? And he says, they will. So I guess this opening sequence is really just establishing the state of society, at least in Japan right now. As Izuku said, tensions are high. We're coming off of the big war, a lot of hero deaths, a lot of hero resignations, the multiple prison breaks with tons of villains all out in the open now, running wild. So understandable that, you know, things are the way that they are right now. And it's also interesting considering what the fifth user says to Izuku later on in this chapter about how it's like they kind of went back in time because society has regressed at this point. It certainly wasn't always the polished society that we, the readers, have come to know since, you know, beginning the series, which is mainly because of All Might, I suppose. But before he really brought order to Japan, or maybe even just the whole world in general, it was a pretty crazy environment, not just for the villains and just people with crazy quirks running wild, but also because of vigilante profiling, because, you know, being a pro hero wasn't always a thing either. Then All Might shows up to help Izuku evacuate this large woman who was even bigger than All Might, so I guess she's like 12 feet tall or something. Then All Might gives Izuku some pork katsu for him to eat, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, but apparently Izuku's favorite food is pork cutlet bowls, so that's a little nice moment. But going back to when Izuku is talking to Banjo, the fifth user, they say we still don't have any clues on Shigaraki and All for One, you know, and the League of Villains and everyone else, and they're basically in the dark. But Shigaraki with All for One's quirk would become so powerful that essentially no one, even like a dream team of like Endeavor, Aizawa, and the other top heroes working together, wouldn't be able to stop him. So it's like it has to be Izuku with the full power of One for All in order to get the job done here. And it's that sends us all the way back to the end of chapter 305 when the first user is talking to the second and third user saying like, please you guys, you know, work with us. He needs your power. If Izuku is going to unlock the full power of One for All, he's going to need your cooperation. So they're still standing facing the wall, and there's like this silence after the first user says that. And then to break the silence, Banjo gets Izuku's attention and he's like, hey, you better get used to using the other quirks you hear, like the fourth and sixth user's quirks, Danger Sense and Smokescreen. And then the sequence gets pretty interesting at this point because the second and third users finally begin to speak, but it's also kind of implied that Izuku can't hear them because we see the fourth, fifth, and sixth users like talking to Izuku at a distance, helping him with the quirk stuff. But it's also being made out that like, I guess he's not hearing what the second and third are saying, meaning that they're just exclusively talking to each other in the first. But the third user says, we came from the harshest era of history when All for One was at his peak and he was ready to dominate the entire world. Back then, those who were dominated couldn't even tell that they were dominated, and the leader was scared of that future. To prevent him from taking full control, it took us working together to push back against him. And that totally makes sense because, you know, the second and the third existed at the same exact time, and that was also back when the first user was still alive, which was, you know, implied to be like 100 or even over 100 years ago. And also, aside from just him talking, we're seeing the third user's face, and he looks like a new character, I guess. I don't think he's Kirishima. It seems like this is just like an original character at this point. Then finally, the second user speaks and he says, Yoichi would know, right? And then the first user responds saying, yup, meaning that the first user's name is Yoichi, which makes sense, you know, given the whole naming thing of the vestiges. And we're seeing the second user's face, and he still kind of looks like Bakugo, but not exactly. Like, the hair is just mildly different. It's a different color as well. The eyebrows are different, but the eyes are the same. But the one glaring difference, of course, is that he has a huge scar across his face. So it's still up in the air on exactly what's going on with this guy and who he is, because we don't get a name drop or even like a quirk reveal or anything like that. But I'm gonna make an entire video dedicated to all of the vestiges next week, where I'll go into some speculation about this guy. But we're getting more insight into why they are the way that they are, I guess. And he says, you think that we could really get behind some bright-eyed brat who wants to save his arch nemesis? And Yoichi says, I agree. it's certainly delusional, just like how a certain pair saved their nemesis and extended a helping hand back then. And while he's saying this, we see a flashback of the second and third users breaking into that room that All For One like locked Yoichi away in, that we saw in the original flashbacks of that sequence. And the second user like aims his gauntlet at Yoichi at first, and this is the clearest we're getting to see of what's going on with his gear. Now, this definitely doesn't look like Bakugo's gauntlet because, you know, Bakugo still has his hands free, and this kind of like has a vertical barrel to it, which is just completely covering his hand. And I think this might be lining up with what I've been speculating about, with his quirk being some kind of like laser beam or some kind of projectile or energy blast or something like that. But clearly there's a reason why he needs the support gear to be able to use it. So that goes into what his ability could be as well. But it ultimately means that the last quirk that Izuku unlocks will likely be this. But then Yoichi says to the second user that if you didn't get me out of that room right then and there, nothing would have started. So in a way, that kind of strengthens the Bakugo time travel theory a little bit, because the whole purpose of him going back in time was to save Yoichi and to start the lineage of One For All. Not saying it's confirmed, of course, far from it, but I just think it's pretty interesting how it's kind of lining up with that theory, right? Then Yoichi says, isn't the reason you brought up the past that you realized that fact in the first place? And then the second user says, you really think the kid will save the day? And Yoichi's like, yep, One For All will never bow to my brother, but it's because you extended your hand that One For All was able to begin in the first place. So I guess this is the moment where Yoichi is like convincing the second that Deku is the one that we can put our faith into. Like, he is the one that is going to stop All For One finally. And while he is a bright-eyed kid who wants to save his arch nemesis, he's not too far off from you yourself. And then we come to the very end of the chapter where I think the second user is directly talking to Izuku here, at least like in vestige real-time form, the way that the sixth user was talking to Izuku a couple chapters back. And he says, listen clearly, kiddo, we're going full speed ahead now. And Izuku says, yes, sir, while he's like eating his pork cutlet. So I guess this is confirming that Izuku has unlocked his quirk along with the thirds at this point. Although it's possible that we could have seen him use the third user's quirk at the end of chapter 308. I mean, maybe, you know, with the whole line coming off of his back. I don't want to say that that's confirmed, but it's a possibility. And also in the spoilers yesterday, the translator said that the full speed ahead now thing could be like a pun on what the quirk could be, meaning that the third user does in fact have some kind of like engine type quirk, because we even see it more clearly in this chapter that he has some kind of mufflers coming off of him. Not really sure, but let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments. What do you think about the second and third users? Let me know, and if you like the review, guys, please give it a like, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.